Well, good evening, everyone. First, let me start by saying this is a really compelling book. And I love books that bring history to life and make very complex issues suddenly make sense because they're told through someone who lived through much of the history. And so, Farooq, I want to thank you for that. I feel like I understand the situation in a very complicated place of the world much more, but it's also very entertaining. This man has lived a life that many would have called a self-made man, and through many situations where others maybe would not have survived. And you've made it all the way here, and we're so pleased to have you here with us, and really a great friend of this institution and a great peacemaker in the world. So we're going to cover it all. I thought what we'd do, Farooq, is start with a map. And I think it's important because you'll be hearing about a lot of places, about a lot of the conflict. And I'd like to just get a sense of the audience. Have any of you in the audience been to Kashmir, either Pakistan or India side? Mm. Only at Asia Society yes. Would you have such an informed audience. That's fabulous. And how many have been to India or Pakistan? So you probably have some sense of this, but of course, this is all back in the news now. And you've seen that President Trump has made his fourth offer to mediate the situation. But tell us a little bit about what that map means to you, or what people need to understand that they don't understand.
Well, first of all, Josette, I'm very, very happy to be here. I've had the great pleasure of being associated with this organization for at least 27, 28 years. Nick Platt was the former president, and before that, Phil Talbot, who was the president. The great pleasure of knowing all of them, and a lot of interactions. And so I'm very pleased with many friends who are here and many others who are participating in this discussion. Now, there was a time, and I'll go back to when we started what was called the Kashmir Study Group, and the reason we set up the Kashmir Study Group was that we had a lot of problems going back into the early 90s. So I was invited by the government of India. The Prime Minister said, come and see what perhaps we can help. So I went to Delhi, met them. Then I said, I've got to meet the Kashmiri leaders, and they were in jails. And I met them. And the reason I'm coming about this is the map is, and then I went from there to Pakistan, and I met many, many people. What I found was that how little that all of them knew about this region and how it was formed, and which, of course, unfortunately, has resulted in the present problem. Mm-hmm. When you look at that map, you look at the map which says Srinagar, Indian administered, Pakistani control, or Pakistani administered. That whole area was called Jammu and Kashmir. And this Jammu and Kashmir was formed through historical, you might say, the involvement of the British, the involvement of the Mughals, and they created this area called Jammu and Kashmir, somewhat similar to the former Yugoslavia. Regions were put together.
There's an excellent addendum in the book that really gives such a great history of all of these trends.
The main area is basically which is the center of that is the Srinagar, the capital, is what is called the Kashmiri-speaking area. And here today, most probably, I think close to between 6 and 7 million people live. And they are the people that was, when you say Kashmir, they are the Kashmiris. Mm-hmm. Others were added on. And lots of issues came up. And of course, we come from the Kashmiri-speaking areas, which has its own culture, its language, its music. And when partition of India took place in 1947, this area of Jammu and Kashmir, something similar to the former Yugoslavia, consisted of 5 different areas put together. And now I had an opportunity as a youngster of living on both sides of that border.
Yeah. Well, let's go to a picture of you as a youngster here. So you're in the middle. That's Grandpa, I guess, and your father. Both very interesting men, very prominent in their own areas and fields as merchants, as experts on Kashmiri goods, but also leaders of trying to find solutions in Kashmir. But right now I want to focus on the little guy in the middle. You look so young and innocent there, and of course the partition happened when you were 3 years old, I believe. And you then have a story for about a decade that's some mixture of courage, toughness, and brazenness. And you were on your own a lot, needing to defend yourself, not to pull all the headlines out of the book, but there's a story of you stealing your father's bodyguard's gun and trying to shoot a school bully in Pakistan. There's a story of you trying to burn down your school after a nun beat you up. There's some story about working your way out of end-of-the-year exams by being the best darn cricket player ever seen. And but always, what strikes me in all these stories is how you built networks of people that came to be devoted to you and appear throughout the book and your life story. But tell us a little bit about this, because you're really a self-made man. You had to defend yourself, you had to take on bullies, and this happens over and over again, and you had to be fearless.
Yes, of course, there's nothing by plan. You just have to make sure that when it happens, you have to improvise. But that's, when you look at that, my grandfather was very well known in Kashmir. Mm-hmm. He was in business, but he also was in arts and crafts. Mm-hmm. And his father would travel to a place called Kathwari, which is famous for the Kashmir blue sapphire. And our family name is not Kathwari. I changed it. Again, our family name is Mattu. We were Mattus, and then because of the fact they used to go to this area of Kathwari, they also came to be known as Kathwaris. Mm. So when I was getting my, what is almost like a citizenship papers, I saw this. And in fact, I saw this in our marriage certificates, which said Farooq Mattu, also known as Kathwari. So I said to my grandfather and father, what is this? They said, well, we used to go there to get the blue sapphires. I said, I like that name, and I changed it. And since that time, all our family is called Kathwaris. My father was, he had studied law. This is before undivided India in Lahore, and then he had studied his master's in UP, in Aligarh Muslim University. And my grandfather was also, they were all also in politics. And when I was about, I think most probably 4 years old, my father decided, we were on the Indian side, in the Indian administrative side. He decided on his own to go to the Pakistan, and the Pakistan side for a 2-week visit. And his permit was cancelled. So that started the adventure. Then he decided, along with my grandfather, I had an older brother and sister. My grandfather said, I think that my brother must have been 7 or 8 and sister 9, 10. They said, no, let them stay here. You folks cross over to the other side, because this whole thing is going to be solved within 1 year. Well, that's what they thought. So we crossed over, and we lived with my mother, and I crossed with 2 other my siblings at 8,000 feet. That's where these things happened with the nuns and the beating and all that stuff,
It's a tough neighborhood.
Brother Devlin, I want to tell you, Brother Devlin is from Oyona Prep. Yeah. So I went to Catholic schools, and these nuns were pretty tough. Mm-hmm. So I said, let's burn this school down. How can we tolerate it?
So at one point in your book, you say, this is why I'm always calm in difficult situations. And somehow it seems when you were confronted with, really life or death, or people trying to stop you in your tracks, you just decided you're going to find a way to go forward. How often do you refer back to those experiences?
Well, we do, in the sense that, these you don't plan for. These things happen. You react to it. And, I was once, there was when I was a student, there was also, when Kashmir, of course, has gone through lots of problems, and I took an American journalist. I was playing cricket in Delhi, coming back, the trouble in the 60s, and I was sitting next to a journalist. I mean, I know he's a journalist, an American. I said, why are you going to Kashmir? He said, I want to cover what's happening there. Must have been 17 or so. I said, who's going to take you around? He said, I don't know. I said, I will. Well, I shouldn't have. So I took him around.
This could have gotten you in a lot of trouble.
Well, it did. I was arrested. I was put into jail. And not for long, fortunately. And it was there that one day, you know, when I also like tea, you gave me some tea, even at that time. So in the morning, I had not eaten, so I saw this soldier. I said, could you please get me some tea? He said, what do you think, you're in a hotel? I said, no, I want tea. So he put a gun on my head and said, if I say it one more time, I'll shoot. Fortunately, some other soldier came in and took him away. So fortunately, you know, I've been able to survive. Really. You could have pulled the trigger. I wouldn't be here.
So your grandfather, you write quite a bit about the relationship, and your father was in Pakistan, and you lived with your grandfather. And you talk about he was quite a tough man, and you seem like quite a tough young man, and that your wills would cross every now and then, and he had a particular idea about your life, and you had a particular idea about your life. And at one point, you leave the main house and you go live in this cowshed in the back for a few years. It sounds like it was cold, and you illegally rig up some electricity. Wasn't that taking stubbornness a little far?
Well, you see, keep in mind, for 10 years we lived on the other side, which is the Pakistan administered side, in the mountains. So when I came back, I was a little bit different than the city people. So my grandfather was pretty tough. And he would tell me things, and I said, no, I don't think I can do it. We never heard something like this. And we had a number of arguments, and as you know, it was something that was a small little thing. It was one day, I used to play a lot of cricket. That was my main, and he wanted me, like you said, like most at that time, you were expected to either study medicine or engineering. But,
I think that's still true.
But I decided that, without telling him, I went to English literature and political science because I could play sports and cricket most of the time. Then he found out, got very, very upset. And in fact, once he said, I wanted to get some cricket shoes. He sort of said, don't. And you got to write an application for that. So I looked at him and said, application? I'm going to leave your house and I'm going to stay with you. Well, where would I go? So the back of his property was a little cow shed with a cow in the bottom. So I decided I'm going to live with the cow. For 2 years I lived there.
So I want to get a little bit into, let's see what we have. Okay.
Yeah.
So there you are. So we need to talk about cricket, but I want to go forward to this for a minute. This beautiful young woman here. Because I read part of your story as a very elaborate romance story that was, of course, very subtle in a very conservative zone. But you had your eye on this young woman here, and your parents knew each other. But there's this story about how he brings this huge radio from Mumbai.
Calcutta.
Okay, Calcutta, for something like 17 hours on a bus. A huge piece of equipment so he could put it together in his cowshed, and she can hear the music playing out in the field. So I appreciate your book so honest, because you give us insight into these things.
See, when I came back to Kashmir, I was 15 years old. And so they all, in fact, Frida, her sister, their family, all came to see us, to see who these characters are after 10 years. And so I was in my grandfather's house, in a big house. I was one day walking, and second or third day, in the hallway, and I bumped into this young girl. I think she was 14 and I was 15. So I said, who are you? She said, I'm Farida. Well, that's how we met.
And he writes in the book, he knew something at that moment, right?
Yeah, and then the problem, of course, is, we can talk about it. The fact is that I came here, I didn't have any papers and things of that nature, and she was there, but this time I had gone to college. She had also gone to college, she was teaching, and I knew that if we did not get married, she'd marry somebody else, 23 was, at that time, an old age. I was 24 and she was 23. So I wrote a letter to her and said, and she replied, because if she had not replied, then I knew she was not interested. Then I asked my father to talk to her father. My father, after 17 years, was allowed to go back to Kashmir. And in fact, there's a family here, Vijay, where are you? Vijay Dar, his family, a lot of these, we have interesting, he just came, I think just a few days back from Delhi. He runs a very nice school in Kashmir. But his father was a class fellow of my father. And later on, his father became very, very close to Prime Minister Nehru and Indira Gandhi and worked for them. And he was very much involved. In fact, he helped my father come back to Kashmir. Mm-hmm. And it's a long story. In fact, he drove him from Jammu in a jeep in 6-8 feet snow to bring him back. And so because of the fact that I didn't have papers, I came here. After 17 years, my father was allowed to go back with the help of his father and the family. I said, we got to get married. She would not come here without being married. So we found a provision that we could get married over the telephone. So I was living in Brooklyn, and she was in Kashmir. So we got married over the telephone, then she came, and that's about the time she came. Yeah.
Mm. There's a beautiful picture in the book of you in very traditional wedding attire, but your husband was on the other side of the world. So I guess you each dressed up in your wedding attire.
In fact, Ibrahim Shadad, he's her brother-in-law. He was a witness because she needed a witness, and he was one of the witnesses. He just came from Kashmir just last week, and to the marriage.
So I don't know if any of you are getting a sense that this is like a movie, but it is. So to go back here for a minute, because there's a theme throughout your entire book, and to me it really connects to your experience as captain of a cricket team. And you make a point that being captain of a cricket team is very different than soccer, very different than American football, because you're on the field. You're not just doing strategy. You are in there leading the team, and that this seems to have informed your entire view of leadership.
It does, and actually, this is our cricket team in Kashmir. I'm in the middle. I was the captain of the team for a couple of years, which was not normal those days. We have our players, and then we have also our principal and our various professors were there. And cricket actually also was not necessarily played, as the Kashmiri Muslims didn't play cricket. It was somewhat played by Vijay Dar, they're Kashmiri pundits, they played cricket. Kashmiri Muslims mostly played soccer, and the Sikhs played hockey. So it was a rare thing for somebody like me to get up and then become a captain of this whole team. And, we won all the champions, matches and everything else. But the cricket taught me in the sense that, one of the reasons I could do it because I was studying political science and English literature, where I could spend a lot of time on the field. If I was in medicine, engineering.
Very logical.
Very logical. Cricket, we practice every day. Mm-hmm. Now, I've got a number of Ethan Allen people here. They all know about cricket. They don't know the game, but they know in the cricket, right, Catherine? Absolutely. In cricket, they know that the captain has to play with the team, strategize with the team, cheer with the team, be part of it. Mm-hmm. It's not like baseball where somebody, the coach from the side chewing gum is telling them what to do. In this case, the captain has to be right in the field. And, I'll tell you later on, this has actually been the part of what our whole Ethan Allen enterprise of 5,000 people. At one time, I had 400 cricket teams.
Could you repeat that? I don't understand.
Well, what we did was I created teams where the captain would be the person running it. In fact, today, too, we are one of the most decentralized business models. We run a sawmill up in Vermont. We run manufacturing in the Blue Ridge Mountains, in the Green Mountains. We have design centers in Oklahoma, California. How do you run them? So we said, we are going to bring people up, and every one of those areas will be run by a captain. That's the concept.
Oh.
The captain is going to run it. They're going to cheer, they motivate, and that's how we have been. So this, what you see over there, has influenced in the way we run our enterprise.
Amazing. Could the Ethan Allen people raise their hands here? Oh, nice. So to move here, so now you somehow get your way to the U.S.
Yep.
You're in Brooklyn.
I'm adopted.
Okay. And one thing that is persistent through this book is him making lifelong friendships with people from India, from Pakistan, different religions and faiths, and this is his adopted Jewish family.
Yep.
Tell us about the Levies.
The Levies, they lived in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met them, in fact, the second or third day when I came, I went to their home. They were in sort of the Flatbush area of Brooklyn. I never thought I had met any Jewish people. Although Howard Schaefer, who was the American diplomat after the
who
journalist,
you also brought, yeah.
Who then later on I took him around, and he, you know Howard Schaefer, and yeah, you know him too. He came to Kashmir. I took him around and all of that. Then later on I found he was Jewish. But when I met them, they were a fantastic family. He was a doctor, and they said, I used to live in Elmhurst, Queens, because that was closest to JFK, because when you land at JFK, you've got to live close by.
This was Schaefer or the Levies?
No, the Levies. So when I was there, I had met the Levies. So they said, you know, and I used to go there every weekend for a great meal. My best meal was at their home. And they said, you better live in Brooklyn. You're so far away by subway. So I went to Brooklyn. They adopted me. And in fact, this gentleman is my grandfather. So he also we then became great friends. We had some battles in Kashmir, but he would also visit us. And so the Levy family really gave me an opportunity of, you know, having a family here.
Mm-hmm. So your new life in America, you got fired from your first job in Queens. Yep. And then you decide you're going to accept a bookkeeping job, but you didn't know what bookkeeping was. So before we started up here, I said, you know, there's a word for you, and I can't find it, but there's chutzpah. But you won't know what that means. He said, I totally know what it means. I lived in Brooklyn, so.
Yes. You know, I mean, the first job was in Queens for 2 weeks, and I had no idea what I was doing. So this person comes in, very nice person. He said, yeah, here's your check, don't come on Monday. I said, see you on Tuesday. He said, no, not Tuesday. I said, when I then realized.
But you better figure out what.
No, I was fired. Then I wrote a letter to the president. Everybody, how can you treat people like this? I was thinking of this as a career. I had been only there 2 weeks. I had no idea. But my next job was I saw an ad in the paper. Those days you had to look at ads, and it said bookkeeper needed. So I asked my class fellows, I said, what's a bookkeeper do? Because I'd never seen a calculator, nothing book. Anyway, it was in Canal Street. A small printing company, the two owners, and Abe printed the envelopes, and Sally was running the thing. And it was a long story, but I got the job. Mm-hmm. And, you know...
And you didn't get fired?
No, but two things happened. No, I didn't get fired. No, in fact, I got, you know, a few months later, my salary doubled. And the other thing that I learned was this, that these two partners was to argue all the time. Mm. Now, you know, our cricket team, you know, I had always dealt with people who would argue. Now, I was, you know, by this time maybe 21. So one day I said, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. King, why do you arguing all the time? What's the problem? Tell me and I'll help you.
It's New York.
No, first they were surprised that this, you know, 20 years something is telling them. Finally, they told me what the problem was that day they were arguing about was how much money they'll take from petty cash. I said, you know, I'm your bookkeeper, I know. Each one of you can take $100 and I should get $10. So they said, why you? I said, I'm giving you advice. So I learned two things. Common sense is prevalent all over, and asking something for yourself is also good.
Mm. So chutzpah, hustle, and
common sense. But, you know, another thing happened was that my grandfather and my other family, they decided to help me by sending me 12 wicker baskets of arts and crafts when I was working in the printing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was going to school at night at NYU. And if they had not sent those baskets, I don't know what my career would have been something else. So we had a lecture from the CEO of Bloomingdale's, his name was Marvin Traub, at our NYU. So I called his office, 8, 10, 12 days. Finally, he saw me. I took some papier-mâché, Kashmiri, beautiful stuff to them.
This is the CEO of Bloomingdale's.
Right here in 59th
And he's bringing his wicker baskets.
Yeah, just one enough. So they called him a merchant. They liked it. So Bloomingdale's became a customer. So I got in the business of home. That's how I got it. But working there at the canal bookkeeping, after 9 or 10 months, they realized, not me. He said to me, your school is near Wall Street. Why don't you work on Wall Street? So I said, I'm studying marketing. What would I do? He said, Richard King was his name. He said, go and tell them you're a financial analyst. So I went to the first building on Wall Street and walked every floor. And on Bear Stearns, I think it was the 16th floor, I got a job with Bear Stearns as a financial analyst. While I was still selling Kashmiri arts and crafts.
Yes.
And going to school.
Interesting. So at this point, what are you learning about America as you're going through these experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. First is, my first impression was I had come from Kashmir that time, lots of problems. In fact, this was a 65 war that I had, I was in curfews, no lights. First thing when the plane came, I thought there's a marriage going on because there was lights all over. When it's a different perspective.
Must be marriage celebrations.
Marriage celebrations. The second thing was, I was in an area of conflict. Everything was monitored. So I said, nobody's asking me any questions. I can go anywhere I want to. I said, I'm an American.
I have to say, reading your book and all that gumption you have, you have that DNA that attracts people to America still to this day, that entrepreneurial drive, that, hustle and dreams, all of that. Yeah. So you felt at home.
I did, actually. See, the other thing I noticed was this, that, the first challenge was the first day I came, I had to go to the subway, and they told me it's underground. In Kashmir, you go underground, don't come out. I said, how are you going to breathe? I had a little trouble breathing. But then, but what I noticed in the subway was, I knew nothing of America. I didn't come from a big city. So I had
and
no
there was
idea.
No internet at the time?
No internet, nothing. I didn't read much, a newspaper, anything. The only thing about America I knew was watching movies, either cowboy movies or Hollywood movies, right? I didn't see that in the subway. No cowboys. No glamour.
Yeah.
I said, they're like me. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
That's important.
Very.
So I was one of them.
So another life-changing moment is, but meeting this guy. Tell us about this, because as Tom Nagorski said, this is the most iconic U.S. company, Ethan Allen. And how did you meet, and how did they end up bringing you on board?
Yeah, well, what happened was this, that after I was selling these arts and crafts, I was now working at Bear Stearns, but a year later, the Rothschilds had set up a company. I was still at school, and the portfolio manager somehow needed somebody to help, and my name came up, so I was hired with the Rothschilds as a sort of a junior financial analyst.
Is this all like in your first 2 years in America? It's a movie.
Yeah, well, in a few years, yeah.
Okay.
4 or 5 years. And 3 or 4 years, you're right. And then one of my associates was trying to get here, but in Florida, Roger Widman, he said, they also knew that I was selling arts and crafts. He said, we know the founder of Ethan Allen. Would you like to meet him? Ethan Allen used to be in Manhattan, Midtown. I said, yes. I had no idea. So I went there. He called in one of his merchants. So this young man is from Kashmir. He's got Bloomingdale's as a customer, and Lord & Taylor's too by that time. And he said, do we get anything from there? They said, yes, we get this fabric, the cruel fabric, never comes on time, and a quality problem all the time. So he looked at me. In the middle is Nat and Sal, and right next to him is Clint Walker, who was the president. So Nat and Sal looks at me and says, can you help? I said, absolutely. I had no idea.
So Nat was the founder of Ethan Allen.
He's the founder of Ethan Allen. See, Nat and Sal, he and his brother-in-law They were from New Yorkers, but they went to Vermont in 1932 and established manufacturing operations and established Ethan Allen. So my first,
So he says, can you help us?
Can I help? It was when I had no idea about fabrics. So he gave me some samples. I sent to Kashmir. They came in. There were some problems. But anyway, I got in the fabric business. So I said, Ethan Allen, why not others? So I now started selling fabrics. And it developed into a fairly good business. But then I needed somebody to run it in Kashmir because very disorganized. So Ibrahim Shadad here, Ibrahim was a lawyer, just young, I know him. So I was sitting with him one day in Kashmir. I said, I'm looking for somebody to run a business here who knows nothing about business, but just going to do what I tell him to do, because here they tell me, we've been doing this for a century and not going to change. He said, I have no knowledge of business. I'm a lawyer. I said, then you're the right person. And for 45 years, he's been working there still.
Raise your hand, yes.
Yeah, right, yeah. But anyway, that's how the association with Ethan Allen started. And later on, it led to, about a year later, he called me again, this Nat and Sell. He said, we're getting rugs. My merchant tells me we have problems of getting rugs from India and Romania. Can you help? I said, absolutely. I had no idea where Romania was. I had no idea rugs in India were made. And later on, I didn't go to Romania. I did go to India, Varanasi, and all kinds of places. And Abraham, later on, 5 years later, I asked him to go and handle it. He's now handles that also in India. But that's how I started with Ethan Allen. And a year later or so, he calls me again. I came to know him. And he said, you're a merchant and a marketing person. Why are you working on Wall Street? Why don't you join Ethan Allen? So I thought about it. I said, how about a partnership? He said, what do you mean a partnership? So I was now fairly old. I think I was 25 or so, 24, no, even 24 or so. And anyway, we set up a partnership where my company would develop products for Ethan Allen from all over the world. And that's how I started. And that photograph is when I became president, and I'm recognizing him, who was the chairman and founder, and Clint Walker, who was the president of the company at that time.
And in the book, you talk about challenging them, saying, I'll join if I can be president. Yeah. And they didn't want to lose you. They knew they had a real talent, but what do you think they saw in you that had them make that space in this iconic company?
Well, I got to tell you this. For a long time, I thought that something must be wrong for them to keep me when I'm giving them trouble. That I resigned a few times. But he still wanted me, and I was wondering why. At that time, when I joined Ethan Allen, they must have had 25 vice presidents, hundreds of executives. And here I am, many of them, some of them, Corey Whiteley is executive vice president in Ethan Allen for 32, 33 years. Mike, you've been what, 35?
34 years.
34 years. So we have folks in Ethan Allen for many, many years. And I said to myself, why? But I tell you why. You asked me this question. Yeah. I think the reason what he saw was this, that if there was an issue, like for instance, when they said there's a problem, they can't get fabrics. I said, I'll do it. But then you have to do it. When he said, I have problems getting rugs, well, you can't just say, what I realized after this is that the difference is, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of people working with me now, those who say that this is how we're going to do it, but I'm going to do it, rather than write a nice memo and say this is a problem, let somebody else do it. That's unfortunately what most people do. And by the way, Carl Weber is here. He helped me write the book. Carl, I guess get up. Yeah.
Great job.
I had to dictate for 2 years. He would come to my house with a tape recorder, and I will tell him a story. And we said to him in the book, I said, no, don't make it complicated. I'm going to do it from the time I was born to up to now. And do a chapter at a time. And
I have to say it's very honest. I mean, you really, you're very honest about all the things you went through and what you were feeling and even family conflicts, but it gives the book such authenticity and a real sense of all of that. So one thing that, there's 2 points of this picture that I want to bring out. One is you have a farm. When I visited Ethan Allen, when I came to see, this is very much a part of your family and how you lived, but also became part of the Ethan Allen team, and here you're hosting retailers at the family farm. Also, you brought the Kashmir Study Group up, and I mean, all this became a center of things. And it struck me because you were called Mountain Man at some point in Kashmir. Nature's a big part of your life, and this is very important to you. But could you talk about that?
It is. Now keep in mind, this is almost 40 years back. I mean, I just had done a little better with Ethan Allen. We were invited to the Hudson Valley up near Hudson, New York, by one of our friends for a weekend. And I looked around and I said, I like this place. So I asked them if there's something that we could buy. Initially, this broker showed us a house, a nice house, but, I said, no, I want a project. I don't just want a house. So called back, he said, all right, I've got this farm, an operating farm with cows and dairy and chicken and, fruit trees. I remember Farida and I and 3 kids, we went there. It was December 23, 1980. It was minus 30 degrees or something. They couldn't even leave. The kids couldn't even leave the car. So we went in to this farmhouse and we looked around. We met the owners who wanted to retire. Santo and Mario, I said, okay, we'll buy it, but we want to keep on working. No analysis. Today you got to do some environmental studies. You'll do all kinds of stuff. I shook hands, and in half an hour or 45 minutes, we bought the farm. And they started working with us. And it's been tremendously great because I even go there, for my exercise, I go to prune the trees. But I like to do that. I don't go to play golf or to Florida. I go farm and do some exercise there. So our children also, Farah, our daughter, is here. And if Umar and Nadia have turned up. Oh, they're way all the way back. All right. Those kiddos, they enjoy the farm. They were there this weekend because we have a lot of ski resorts close by. So this farm has been very, very important to put a balance. It gives a sense. In fact, I have many Ethan Allen meetings in there. But it also played a very important role in this whole issue of Kashmir and the conflict and the study group. You can talk about that too. Yes,
and we'll get deeper into that. But before we do, you developed 10 principles of leadership. It's right in the start of the book. Some of them would be on any leadership list, and some I thought were very intriguingly different. In particular, I wanted to call out number 9, speed. And you talk about the moment you realized that excellence isn't enough if you miss the market moment, and how speed became about excellence. But could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's ever more so today, right?
No, absolutely. Markets. Today, one of these important principles is the fact that you today have to act fast. We've got a number of today, if you are not relevant, and the relevancy today has to be done, like we have Hutton Rodney is the head of our chief marketing officer, and we today were discussing in the last few weeks of making major changes in our marketing. But you have to be able to do it fast. You've got to think about it. Many of my associates are here, whereby we have to, speed, like for instance, I said, I bought the farm within 45 minutes. That's the concept of speed. Obviously, you've got to think through. But speed is critical. Speed meaning, how do you remain relevant? We are, in the business of design. How are we relevant? We are in manufacturing. We are in retailing, logistics, technology. So I have spent a little time visiting some military organizations here, gone to a number of countries and other places, and I learned with them. I spent some time with the Marines just as a guest. So I learned from the Marines that if you are 70% ready, do it. You're not going to be more than so. Our folks here all know that you think about it, you discuss it, and you say, okay. If you are trying to be 80, 90% ready, the chances are you're not going to do it. So Gina Early, she runs our Metro New York area, so I just promoted her to run Manhattan. She was ready. She was 70%, 60% ready that she's going to do it. Just promoted her last week. She's ready, right? Last week she got promoted. She runs. She has been running Long Island for I think 17 years, 15 years. But you know, so I spent a day with her last week, and she also took. But you also have to be human. She told me that her daughter is 11 years old, and she said, you know, we have a tradition here of taking the parent takes a lunch to her, and I told her I'm not going to be able to do it because I'm visiting. I said, what's the matter with you? I'm going to go with you and let's go to the school and have lunch with her. So we did.
I love that.
And the principal came out and all that stuff, so we went to the principal's office. This was last week or 2 weeks?
She loved it. Last week's back.
Last week, yeah.
So the human touch. And we have to get to the audience, and we will in a few minutes, and we have a lot to cover. But we need like 5 hours for this interview because everything's so interesting. But it could seem impulsive, but it seems much more that you've developed this highly honed sense of gut instinct. Or what do you say allows you to act very quickly, to know when you know? And I ask you, my father was 101st Airborne. He jumped at D-Day. He was captured by the Nazis. He's got a book. And they said he should have been killed 17, but he was a businessman. He had this incredible sense of gut instinct that was honed in very similar types of things. And I wonder if you feel that's true about yourself. Do you have like an internal guidance system?
It has to be. You know, I mean, otherwise you would not be doing. I mean, that has to be part of your DNA. But having said that, you also have to, on a very fast-track basis, analyze the situation and understand the risks, understand the positives and the negatives, and which I do, and then we make the decision. I mean, we don't do it, we just don't do it all, without thinking.
Right.
Now, the question is, how long do you take time to think? For some folks, they think and never do it. Unfortunately, that's the case. In our case, we think, we evaluate, and then you also have to have, fortunately, you got to be lucky to have the gift of evaluating it as you go along. You've got to have, it's a gift that one has.
Right.
Been lucky, but then also keep in mind that in most cases, I also get input. When I get input from across the board, but don't take a lot of time. I would call 8-10 people. Yesterday, for instance, we needed some important input. Was it yesterday? Yesterday. So I called 21 of our leaders around the country, and in 1 hour, I got input, and then we made the decision. But you've got to also get input. But then you also need to have good leaders. Right, Gina, you're on the call? All right, yeah.
Very good. Well, you have a beautiful family, and we're going to touch on what is a very difficult subject that you touch on in the book, which is the loss of your son, in this area of conflict. I will have you talk about Irfan and what happened there.
Yeah, I see Irfan. First of all, I'm very, very happy that we have Irfan's teacher and headmaster, Brother Kevin Devlin. He has been a friend of ours since he was his teacher. Irfan, like me, went to Catholic schools. And Irfan, he used to discuss religion with him. He went to a Catholic school. He was very bright. He even was great in music. He was great in poetry. But he was also, to a great degree, impacted by the conflicts of the world in Kashmir and at that time Afghanistan. And he said, I've got to do something to help. And, we tried very hard to tell him, focus on your studies, do all those things, this is not, but, he said, no, I want to. And then he said, I want to study something to do with Muslims. Why are they suffering? Why are they such a bad governance? Well, coincidences are there that when I was in Pakistan, one of my friends at the school, when I was at 15, I went back to the Kashmir side. He had come to visit us, and he was a lawyer, very well known. In fact, he ended up the jurist at the International Court of Hague. So he had come and he said, he was teaching for something at Columbia University, and he listened to Irfan and he said, you know, we have an international university, and Irfan was going to McGill after his high school, after he left Iona. Prep, he went to McGill, but he really was still wanted something. So my friend said, you know, why don't you come there for a semester or 2 semesters and learn about Islamic law? Well, you know, he didn't want to, but he wanted to very much. You know, he had his own mind. So he went there, and while he was there, I went there to see him in Islamabad, in the university there. We are very, very pleased to have Pakistan's ambassador, Munir Akram, here, and Kelly. Good to see both of you here. And we'll talk a little bit about when we come to the Kashmir study group, the role you played and Nick Platt played. But going back briefly to that, so I went there and I was very much upset with what I saw. I saw this was the hotbed of, at that time, the Afghans fighting the Russian influence, the Mujahideen. It was before, not the, and he was very much, and I saw this was the hotbed of it, and he was in the middle of it. But he realized, and then a few months later, there was a holiday, and that weekend, 4 of the students decided that let them go and see what's happening in Afghanistan.
And of course, the Mujahideen at that time were considered freedom fighters and heroes.
President Reagan called them the heroes. Yeah. So they were the heroes. So he went there with 3 other students, and unfortunately, they were in a place called Jalalabad, and it was bombed. So he lost his life, and he was buried there. And, it has affected our life. We had an opportunity of going there. We went there, in fact, with Farida and Farah. Our daughter is here, Omar's son is here. And, he was a very, very bright, but he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. There were 4 students. One of them had gone to fetch some food, and he escaped. The other 3, the mortar shell hit them, and they were buried there. And, you never know. Look at it.
And you visited the site with the family?
I visited the site. We all went with the help of the...
And you've set up a memorial there?
We did. We one of our friends there up in Pakistan helped create the graveyard that is there. But, we have not been able to go because of the trouble. It was after a few years that the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and of course you can't go there with them. But he has left a great legacy. It has affected our lives. It also changed my perspective. I said I must try to help positively on the Kashmir issue. That's what changed my perspective, and I spent the next 15, 20 years very deeply involved in seeing what we could do. Because I realized that a lot of these folks who get young people to involve with these themselves, they don't do it. They just talk. They have a lot of innocent people get caught into this. So it was at that time, as I said, in the Kashmir, trouble had started again. And in India, and Pakistan, they both have their perspectives. But in the early 90s, trouble started. And when you're a strong power like India, they said, we're going to crush it with military force. Well, they didn't. What happened was it created more violence. Bad for the Kashmiris because they started getting guns from Pakistan, and 20,000, 30,000 young Kashmiris died just in a few months. So it was at that time, as I said, we'll come to the Kashmir study group a little bit.
We actually have a picture, the next picture.
Okay, yeah.
Let me just ask you this, though. You say very beautifully in the book that the best memorial to your son is to help build a world where no young people will lose their lives in war. And it also seems that it opened a period of time in your life where you dove into the Quran to really find its meaning and to understand what is the legacy of this teaching and how it should be applied in the world. You were telling me even how the key role that women have played historically has been misunderstood.
Yeah.
But if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, when this happened, when we were growing up, most of us, we came from a family that was, you might say, well-to-do, liberal and all of that. So our involvement with religion was relatively limited. But he, as a young person, going to a Catholic school, with Brother Devlin and others, he used to debate about Islam, right, brother? He had more knowledge about it. He had studied it. He would talk about, he knew about Christianity, Catholicism. He had studied all these things. I hadn't. So I said, I better study. He had more knowledge than me. So I, of course, read it in English. And then I realized how much badly it is misinterpreted and utilized by people who want to misuse it. In the Quran, it says, first of all, it also gives you a reason for somebody's death. You know, when somebody's like that, you lose, you say, what could you have done? As parents, what mistakes did I make? I'm sorry. Okay.
No, don't. I mean, this...
So I said,
Yeah.
you know, let me understand it, and then perhaps I can help. And I realized how badly it's been misinterpreted. Islam talks of peace. Even the concept of jihad is so badly misinterpreted. The jihad is, the biggest jihad is within yourself. How you control yourself. How do you treat people?
It's a spiritual question, you were saying.
It is, the least thing is fighting. But people have taken it over. People with vested interests have utilized it. And then also this, in Islam and like other religions, in the Quran says, you know, when you lose somebody like this, you say, why? And then you learn, you go again and again, it says, you know, each one of us will leave this world at an appointed time. It doesn't matter where you are. Are you in high buildings or you're hiding somewhere? When your time comes, you're going to leave. So you go in the circle. Because I should have lost my life at least 20 times with all the things I did. But my time had not come.
Yeah.
So it sort of gives you that perspective that when your time comes, you've got to go. And that sort of led me to feeling that, you know, when I read it, I understood it. But I'm, you know, like we do at schools, I made notes. You know what you call, I took it as a great book of learning. So I made all kinds of notes and you know, and then I had an opportunity of talking to our children and had a great opportunity of understanding it. And all I learned was that the most important thing is that you've got to be a good person. Like, for instance, I've had a chance of talking about Islam. I'm not a scholar. I am recently, you know, the last few years, I've been asked to co-chair a Muslim-Jewish advisory council. We've had all kinds of meetings from folks in the White House to the senators and everybody else. And once in a while, in fact, it was one time President Bush asked me, I was in the White House, said, could you talk about Islam? I said, you better get a scholar. He said, no, I'd like you to talk about it. He was, you know, as you know, in fact, once he saw Farida, and he asked him, he said, is Farooq doing okay? What did he say? Oh, is he behaving?
That's a different question, right?
So I saw him and I said, President Bush, you asked my wife if I'm behaving. I'm going to ask Mrs. Bush if you are behaving. And he laughed. But anyway.
I think the two wives would have a lot to share, yes.
But he asked me, and he said, could you... I said, okay, if you really insist. I said, I need 30 seconds. He said, you're going to talk about Islam in 30 seconds? I said, sir, we spend millions of dollars in advertising, in television. If in 30 seconds, right, Rodney? In 15 seconds, if you don't get that message right, you've wasted all that money. So I got up and I said, this is something my mother taught me about Islam, who happens to be in New York, you know. She's now 97. Yeah. She taught us that the word Islam means submission. This I'm telling to the White House folks. The word Islam means submission, and a Muslim is a person who submits. And you submit to God, and God equals goodness. I said, that's all we've been taught, be a good person and submit to goodness. You know, and that's what we've been that's what I've been discussing and talking about consistently.
Well, that's a beautiful concept and something very clear. So I'm going to now, because we need to get to the audience, I'm going to go through about 5 slides. And to me, these all tell the story about the legacy of your son and how that made you really a global figure and how you reached out across borders. So first, we can come back to this as the Kashmir Study Group, so you can talk about these amazing people. But we have you here with President Musharraf. We have you here with President and Mrs. Bush and Prime Minister Singh and the First Lady of India. We have you here with President Obama, who we've learned from leaked emails later that they were considering him to be Secretary of Commerce. I think you would have been a great Secretary of Commerce. So it doesn't matter the party, it doesn't matter the religion, it doesn't matter the nationality. You started taking your work to find peace without boundaries. And we can go back to the study group here.
Yes.
But just if you could give us a summary, and then I think maybe the audience will have a lot of questions about where the whole Kashmir issue is headed. But
yes, you see, in the 90s, as I said, the Kashmir problem was was bad. We had lots of problems. In fact, our friend Vijay and his family, the Kashmiri Hindus, Pandits, they were 10% of the population. Conditions became so bad, many of them had to leave. And at that time, the Indian army felt that perhaps by using force, they can control it. But, force doesn't control it. It created a chaos. It was at that time, the Indian Prime Minister of that time asked me, Mr. Rao was the Prime Minister, if he would come in and perhaps look around and see if he can help. So I went to Delhi and I met them and I said, I want to meet Kashmiri leaders. Many of them were in jails. So they said, you're going to go to jail? I said, I will. So I went to the first major jail, actually Abraham Shadad. I took him with me. First, they didn't want me to see them, but anyway, I convinced that I had been asked by the Prime Minister to see them. And so I met these Kashmiri leaders in jail, in a cell. I asked them, I said, what's your plan? They didn't have a plan. Mm-hmm. They said, we want India to leave, and then we'll have a plan. I said, how are they going to leave? Mm-hmm. Then I went to India. They didn't have a plan. Their plan was use force. I went to Pakistan. Prime Minister Bhutto was there at that time, and the Foreign Minister and others. And their feeling was that perhaps militancy will solve the problem. I said, no, it's not going to happen. All of these are not good for Kashmir. We got to help shape I realized, you had the first map. I realized the lack of knowledge about what this Kashmir problem was, even among the Kashmiri leaders. So I helped found, and it was actually Howard Schaefer, is the first on the left. He is a diplomat I met in Kashmir, took him around. And on the right is Phil Talbot. Phil Talbot was one of the presidents here at Asian Society. And a couple of years later, Nick Platt, the president, he also joined us. So these were the first members of the Kashmir Study Group. And we developed 26 members, even two members of Congress. One was the chair of the India caucus, one was the chair of the Pakistan caucus. I convinced them to join. And we even sent a group of them to go to India and Pakistan to do a study. And they came back. And then it was interestingly, we were asked, especially by the Indian government, because they are the predominant factor, by that time Prime Minister Vajpayee, to see if the Kashmir Study Group could get involved in some of the discussions, can come with some ideas. And they decided that and I talked to the Pakistanis, that was Nawaz Sharif was the Prime Minister, that each would send 2 of their very leading persons, one a military person, one a diplomat on each side. And then along with Phil Talbot, Howard Schaefer, Ainsley Embry. Ainsley Embry is in the middle. He was a great scholar at Columbia University. We went to our farm in Livingston, New York. And after a number of days, and they were discussing the Indian point of view, the Pakistani point of view.
Is this the 2005 Larchmont document, or
this
there were many?
No, this was before that. This was actually in 1998.
Wow.
October 1998, we had the meeting at the farm, and we came with After a lot of discussions, the Pakistanis talked to their prime minister, the Indians did, and basically we said to them the main area of conflict is the Kashmiri-speaking area. The people in other areas have their different perspectives. They're not that unhappy. It is the Kashmiri-speaking people. Let's do something for them. And they agreed, and the idea was to give this region the ability to govern itself. And it was called the Livingston Proposal. And later on, right when we did it, a couple of years later, Nick Platt was the president here. He decided that he would have a discussion on this and invited Munir Akram. Munir was the ambassador of Pakistan at that time, and Vijay Nambia, who was the Indian ambassador. It was one of few times, I think maybe in this room, we had a discussion. We'd got a lot of news because Vijay Nambia had not checked with the Indian government to have a meeting on Kashmir with me. And Vijay Nambia was a great, great diplomat, you know. So
I knew him at the UN after he...
that's right. Yeah. So that started the process. I was then, of course, I was invited by India. I went to Delhi, went to Kashmir, and the Indian government said, yeah, this idea is a good one, which is, give the Kashmiri-speaking areas the ability to govern itself. Then we said, how will we do it? That was something. But in principle, they agreed. But then there was a Kargil war, and we went backwards. But then Musharraf got in, and he invited me to come again. And so I went there, met him, and after a lot of discussion, he also agreed that the idea makes sense. Back, forth, he made me shuttle go and back and see Prime Minister Vajpayee. It's all in the book. And they all, in principle, agreed. But then, unfortunately, Vajpayee lost his power. President Musharraf also got into trouble. The Afghan war took place, and they were not able to move on. But the ideas are still there.
Yep. So let's go to the audience. For those of you who would like to ask a question, please identify yourself. No speeches, please. Questions. And we have some time for good questions. So. We're going to bring you a mic so people online can hear, and I don't know if we have online questions.
Thank you. I'm Shamim Abbas, and I'm a professor of political science at the State University of New York at Purchase. I lost my husband in Kashmir within 2 months of my marriage. He was a commando officer of the Pakistani military. For 50 years, we did not know where he died and where he's buried. Anyway, we found out. I did all the research and everything from a letter of Captain Azhar. And I was at one of the meetings at which Mr. Kathwari was there and Angna Chatterjee was there. And we were talking about the disappeared of Kashmir. And my husband, and also mass graves in Kashmir. And my husband was a disappeared of Kashmir. So the thing is, I think I really respect your goodwill, Mr. Kathwari, about trying to make peace for Kashmir and everything. I don't think it will happen. I'm sorry. You know why? Because the Pakistani military does not want it. 4 times, it is the Pakistani military that has got into Kashmir or into India, and they were the ones that have always started the war. And we have Air Commodore Noor Khan on record saying the same thing. He was never consulted, when the 65 adventure took place.
So ask your question.
Yeah. So that is it.
Okay.
So what solution do we have?
Will peace ever happen? And I know you had an impact, but also that you've been disappointed at the openings that have come and that leaders were not able to close the deal.
Yeah, but I must tell you this, that certainly I interacted with Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Then I spent a lot of time with President Musharraf and many of the military people. And one of the, Irfan's death was something that also, unfortunately, made me more relevant. Otherwise, they would say, what, the CEO from America is coming here and talking to us and telling us about things? That was not the case. I met many of the Pakistani generals. I met the Indian leadership, their generals too. I think that my perspective is that certainly there are elements who may say what you have said, but I think there is much more of an interest in wanting to have peace. Now, I'm talking about even in the militaries. Political leaders, in some cases, you may think that is not the case. But I think there is a realization, and then we got to figure out how do you help make it happen. Look at the major problems of that area, the poverty, climate, no water, all that stuff, and they're spending money on tremendous amount of money on armaments. They shouldn't be doing it. I think there is an opportunity, even though the ideas that we have were not implemented, but I think those ideas are still very, very relevant, and I would hope that their sense prevails, because at the end of the day, I mean, India and Pakistan should live together in peace. Does not make sense. Kashmir will not have any peace if India and Pakistan does not have peace.
You know, what strikes me, if you Google your hometown, it looks like heaven. I mean, this is so beautiful. And and in Pakistan, in the Kashmir, this was a great tourism area. It was called Little Switzerland, and so beautiful, and the potential, and even it's the heart of the saffron. I mean, this has meaning for all of humanity.
Yeah.
But the government of India today says this is a bilateral issue. We don't want any outside third parties. Don't conflicts usually require a third party to find a solution?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, what is taking place right now is not good. What India has done is absolutely wrong, which is, I'm not talking about the fact the political situation, again, as I said, many people who talk about that region don't understand how Jammu and Kashmir got involved with India and how it was even formed.
Historically.
And
formed. The British Raj was involved.
British, the Mughals. Look at the British. People don't know this. The Kashmir was independent. Again, I'm to the Kashmiri-speaking people were independent intermittently and it went through being Buddhists. Mm-hmm. In the 5th century BC, most Kashmiris were Buddhists. Srinagar, the capital, was one of the first universities of Buddhism. Then it became Hinduism or Brahmanism. Then Islam came in, but people were living together. And what we have seen now is an opportunity for them to live together. There is that. And I think that we've got to help make that happen. Right now, what India has done, unfortunately, is something very, very wrong. I think that, as you know, when Prime Minister Imran Khan came here, he spoke here, with you. But before that, when he came in, I got a call from the ambassador that he'd like to meet with you. First thing he wants to, I said, but why? He'd like to meet with you as a founder of the Kashmir Study Group. I said, in that capacity, I will meet him. So I met him and had a nice conversation. But his meeting with me was sending a signal. And a lot of that got all over South Asia, it was sent out to all the news and everything else. It was okay, because what he was saying, in my view, was that Pakistan, by meeting me, was saying that we are going to consider options that are feasible and sensible. It was an indirect way of saying it. The ambassador is here, I don't know, he may have different perspectives, but I think it was, for instance, he was here at Asia Society when you interviewed him. Somebody asked him, what is the solution for Kashmir? He said, right here. He said, the United Nations said that Kashmir should either join India or Pakistan, but as far as we are concerned, whatever Kashmiris want, that we'll accept. Now, that was a big, major statement. And I think hopefully sense will prevail, and that this draconian policies of putting 6-7 million people, we were there actually in July. We had a family wedding. Actually, Abraham's granddaughter was getting married, so we were there. Just 2 weeks later, we already saw military coming in. We were wondering why at every street corner. Then we realized...
This is in August?
This is in August, yes.
After the...
July.
July, right before
it happened in August. I came about 2 weeks before, and Frida came, I think, a few days before, 3rd of August. She just came just before that. I think that hopefully sense will prevail, and the Kashmiris will be given an opportunity. Because right now, they cut the internet, they cut newspapers, couldn't even talk. We couldn't talk to our families. It does not make sense. They did it in the summer month with a high tourist season and asked all the tourists to leave. The next month was harvest season. I think sense should prevail because there's no reason for things of that nature. And unfortunately, it has created more ripple effects with the Indian Muslim communities in India.
Yep. We have a question here.
Yes, sir.
As an educator, one of the things that I think can be done is if all the school people of Kashmir get together and all their students say, we want to be really an international free zone, that literally you have the greatest merchants in the world, like yourself. I went on my honeymoon. They sold me everything. In fact, Ceylon sapphires as Kashmiri sapphires. That's what I'd like to see. What do you think?
Absolutely. Our friend Vijay Dar over there, as I said, he did something amazing. He set up a school in Kashmir. And we went there to see his school in July. And he lives in Delhi. It's called the Delhi Public. And he's a Kashmiri Hindu. But he said, I want to go back and help the people. Give him a tremendous amount of credit. He ran a great, great school. He lives in Kashmir, yeah. So, that's an opportunity. That's absolutely what needs to be done. Education. Got to bring people up. Because fighting, and this India and Pakistan fighting is a disaster for them. They should talk of peace. They should work towards making things happen. That's what I did. I spent shuttling back and forth for 10 years. Once President Musharraf had asked me at the middle of the war, almost in the war, to go and meet the Indian Prime Minister and take a message. It's in the book, you'll see it. And I did. And what, against odds, and I went back and forth. They really are, unfortunately, what the British did was a disaster. For Kashmir, for instance, as I said, Kashmir lost its independence in 1586 with the Mughals of India. And then, when the British came in, they decided the policy of divide and rule. They wanted to have a minority rule over a majority people. They put a Hindu rule over Kashmiris. Not only put a Hindu rule over Kashmir, they sold Kashmiris to them, the neighboring state of Jammu. And for Kashmiris sitting here, they know it's an infamous treaty. It's called an infamous Treaty of Amritsar, where the British sold for a relatively small amount. In the treaty, it said, we sell you the people, the land, the animals, and the birds of Kashmir. Think of this. Our families were sold. So we know that.
And these borders that were put in so many places, and we see these conflicts all over the world from borders imposed that were not natural. Who else has a question?
Right
Back here.
Hi, from the British mission. I wasn't around back then.
You're a very brave man.
And I'm also probably a product of
No, we took cricket from Britain, all right. Remember that.
I'm also a product of some of those shenanigans. I've just got a question about what are your views on the quality of political leadership at the moment across the world, and what do you think are some of the drivers behind some of the political leaders we are starting to see manifest?
It's a very, very good question. I was actually asked to join about 2 years back by a congressionally mandated task force. It is the next 9/11 task force, again chaired by Governor Kaine and Hamilton, and it's called Task Force on Fragile States. So we were given an assignment by Congress to see what should the United States do after having spent $7 to $8 trillion after the Afghan war and gone backwards. What should we do? Well, I spent the last 2.5 years, I intentionally went, I had to go to Washington every 6 weeks. Because I said, it was Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republicans and others, I spent again time on this question. I said, let us go and think. First thing is that if we keep on supporting poor governance, we're not going to make a... We are, as if that's what we want to do. If we want to divide the Middle East, then our policy is fantastic. If that's what we want to do, it's working. If we want to keep on killing people in other parts of the world, then our policy is working. If we are and we spend $7 to $8 trillion. So the answer is that we must, especially America and others too, we've got to say that we've got to help good governance. We should not be giving money to poor governance. If we don't do that, if by some magic that will take place, what an impact it's going to make. Because most of the problems of the world are poor governance. And we support poor governance. I'm talking right in the United States and the rest of the world too.
Very definitive answer. Other questions?
Yeah.
Young woman here.
Hi, Sri Bala Subramanian. I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
Given what's happened in Kashmir and the revocation of, Article 370, what do you think the future of Kashmir should be? Should it be, a free zone or a...
Well, obviously, as the Prime Minister Imran Khan, it is the Kashmiris who decide. But my perspective, and again, somebody who is, came from Kashmir, I think that the Kashmiri leadership has been also very poor. That question that was asked before. They've done a very poor job. When they're in power, they take money from both sides. When they're in power, they say things are okay. When they're not in power, they complain. India put all of the folks, whether they complained or not, whether they're part of, they were favoring India or anybody else, they put everybody in jail. It's an interesting thing for the first time. I think for the Kashmiris, they have, and it has been, as I was mentioning earlier, Kashmir has its own culture. Kashmir has its own language, its own traditions. Whether you're Hindu or Muslim, doesn't matter. We all had that. And unfortunately, the more Kashmiri leadership didn't understand it. Like, for instance, you talk of the revocation of the Article 370. You see, Kashmir and Jammu were as I said, Kashmir was sold to the to the ruler of Jammu by the British, and they considered their property. And in 1947, when the partition was taking place, they are the ones, the people of Jammu, their rulers, nothing wrong with it, they wanted to maintain control. They then made a treaty with India, giving them the ability to govern and still maintain those rights of property and everything else. That was the intention. Kashmiri leaders don't understand that. So the answer is, give the people of the Kashmiri-speaking region the ability to govern themselves. If you ask them what they would like to do, their first preference is going to be independence. Possibly second preference is going to be Pakistan. Third preference will be India, maybe, because India, they live with India. They're not on the Pakistan side, so they've seen the Indian. I think what we have suggested, and it's not that we have suggested, this was done with the involvement of the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Kashmiris. We started with saying to give the Kashmiri region sovereignty without an international personality. That's what the Livingston proposal says. Then when I went to the other areas, there were leaders there. They had governments there, like in Jammu, like in the South Kashmir. They said, no, what about us? What's going to happen to us? So we said, okay, give them, if they want self-governance, let them have it. So to answer your question, it's a very important question. I think that the Kashmiri-speaking region is given the ability to govern itself, demilitarized, very hard to change borders, from my perspective now. But on the other hand, if India and Pakistan agree to do that, it's up to them. But demilitarizing it, giving them an ability to govern themselves. As I said, if you ask the Kashmiris in the valley, speaking, they'll say independence. But the question is it feasible? Is it possible? How will that work? But at least self-governance is feasible. And that's where I think we should start.
Farida, he doesn't sound like a man ready to stop doing these causes. So President Trump has offered 4 times to mediate. If he called you up and asked you your opinion on what role the U.S. could play, what would you tell him? This is our last question.
Well, I would say this, what I said earlier, which is what our recommendation was, that the United States should support good governance. Mm-hmm. If they don't support good governance, then nothing going to be done. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in Syria or Iraq or Saudi Arabia or in India. India does not have good governance, in my view. People, of course, like Mr. Modi, but look here, right now, 200 million Muslims are in revolt, more or less. Mm-hmm. I think perhaps, in my view, perhaps Trump has to play some role, perhaps, if possible, in moderating what India is doing, because India is going to be in great trouble, not with Kashmir, with all their minorities. They have tremendous number of people called Dalits, the untouchables. They don't like what's happening. So I think President Trump could play a role, Now, and I think that President Bush played that role, President Clinton did. I worked with both of them. By the time Obama came, they were not there. But they played the role, and I think India can be helped with this, because I think doing something sensible in Kashmir is going to be great for India too, in my view.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking a true leader.
Josette, thank you very much.
Any parting words? No?
Yeah, well, Josette, as I said, I have such tremendous association with Asian society last 28, 29 years, with all your associates and with yourself also. So I'm
Frank
very,
Wisner and yes.
all of them. I've been spent, at least 28, 30 years of my life. When I came in, after some time, it was like meeting friends. All of them were giving me hugs and all of that, because I've known them for a long time. So I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you for everybody for coming and participating, especially at a time when you could have been listening to the impeachment.
And we give you the greatest title, Captain. So thank you, Captain.